You are listening to the Makers Church podcast. For more information about our community, please visit makerschurch.org.
Makers Church, good morning. How we feeling today? It's fall, y'all. I mean, here we are kicking off our fall season together as a church. And if you're new with us, I'm so glad that you're here. My name's Derek. I'm the lead pastor, and I'm so glad that you're with us. You're joining us in a conversation that we began last week called Manifesto, and it's a series walking through these declarative statements about what we stand for. These declarations that we as a church want to build our lives on. And so this morning is the first statement that we really are trying to build our lives on as a church. And our hope as we talk about these things is that these aren't just statements. It's why we've chosen the word manifesto. Because it's a declaration not only of what we believe, but on what we're aiming to live by, the things that we're trying to build our lives on. And this morning we're going to talk about this idea that God is our maker. That God is our maker. And actually, I love this one. It's so important to us that it's actually where the name of our church came from. It's so central and so instrumental in us understanding not only who God is, but who we are. And so with this statement, God is our maker, there's a couple other implications that I want to talk about this morning. And it's this idea that if God is our maker, it means that God is a maker. And the scriptures say that God made us in his image. And there's massive implications to that. And then the other implication is that if God is a maker and we're made in his image, then it also means that we are made to make. And that's what I want to talk about this morning. But before we get into the nuts and the bolts about all of this, I have to say that these declarations that we're going to unpack over the next 8 weeks, these are really our ideals. These are the target. These are the things that we're aiming for. Not simply to believe, but to build our lives on, to live by. And these are difficult things to aim for, and they're difficult things to not fail at. And so I just got a declarative statement as a church. We will miss the mark on these things, both personally and corporately. But it's important for us to understand where we're headed and what we're aiming for, so that when we miss it, we know what to aim for again. See, because these aren't just statements that we want to say that are like they make sense in our head cognitively. We want them to move us out into action. And when we move into these things, we will fail and we will miss it, but we can get back up again together and start moving towards that again together. It's kind of like this idea of like the very same things that I'm trying to instill in my children. In the Miller household, we have all these declarative statements about who the Millers are. And half of them like really aren't true. I just want them to be, so I just claim it. And it's funny, I kind of fake it sometimes. I do it along the way. It's like great faking it as a parent. But one issue we were having with my son is he loves to start things but not finish things. And so just one day, kind of off the shoot from the hip, I just said, Millers never quit. And my son was like, okay. And I was trying to prove the point, and so I was telling Blake, I said, Millers never quit, we'll die trying. And he's like, Dad, I'm 7. I got a lot of life to live, But it's this thing, it's funny, the statement has become so ingrained in him to the point that now when I'm trying to correct them, and I remember so many different times my son and my daughter are just at each other. They're like trying to kill each other, and they're fighting, and I'll tell them, if you don't quit, I'm gonna, and Blake will look at his sister and say, don't you dare quit. Millers never quit. And he just throws it back in my face all the time. That's the whole point of these declarations, right? That even though we'll miss the mark and we'll fail, and it's like I tell them like we'll never quit, but sometimes we do, and that's just us failing at the idea that we'll never quit. But that's what this is about for us as a church. Like, hey, we're going to aim high. And we're going to have these statements that are big and they're powerful and there's so much attached to them. We're going to try to build our lives on these things. And we may die trying, but we're going to give it a go. And so this idea only becomes true. These things will ever only be true of us together as a church if they become true of you. These things that we're aiming for, they'll only ever become true of us as a church if they become true of me and of you each individually, and then collectively, it will begin to shape and form who we are as a people. And so today, we wrap our hearts and our heads around this idea that God is our maker. In Genesis chapter 2, verse 4, it says, "This is the account of the heavens and the earth when they were created. When the Lord God made the earth and the heavens, and no shrub of the field had yet appeared on the earth, and no plant of the field had yet sprung up. For the Lord God had not sent rain on the earth, and there was no man to work the ground. But streams came up from the earth and watered the whole surface of the ground." It says, "The Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And the man became a living being." I mean, right there from the outset, we can see the incredible imagination and creativity of God, our maker. I don't know about you, but when I see dust, my imagination doesn't really take me to the place of like creating living human beings. I don't know about you, but like my worst chore ever is dusting. Because like when you try to dust, you just make the dust go all over the air. And by the time you get dusting off that one shelf, it's settled onto another. And the last thing I would ever imagine when I looked at dust is that I would create a human being. But God is so much more imaginative than we are. And that God is not only a maker, he is the maker. It is in him, it is who God is. That God saw dust. And when he saw dust, he didn't imagine it wiping and landing on another surface before he dusted it. Instead, he grabbed the dust from the ground and he began to sculpt it and make it into humanity. And God, as our maker, has the imagination to see us from dust. But see, I think the most important thing for us to understand when we look at the creation account is not to argue over whether or not it's scientific proof that the world was created in 7 days, or whether 1 day equals 3 trillion years, or whatever we can argue about. I think we can get lost in the conversation. We can begin to argue over how the world was actually created, and we can look at each other as foolish or idiotic for believing this thing or that thing. And it's amazing the amount of division that can come over this conversation. By unpacking Genesis 1 and 2, and I just think the most helpful thing to do when we approach the scriptures, when we start to understand the grandiose, this big idea that God is our maker, is to understand that that is what the creation account is actually trying to show us. It's not trying to define for us how the world was created. It's not even about creation. It's about God. It's about the very essence and character of God. And if you look at it in the way that it was was actually written as poetry. And I love that the poetry of the Genesis 1 and 2 accounts is in itself a creative endeavor. That a human being took their God-given talent and their creativity and their imagination and put pen to paper and wrote a story that would capture not how the world was created, but about who created the world. The most important thing that comes out of the Genesis 1 and 2 accounts is not the scientific proof that God himself created the world, but it talks about the defining characteristics about who God is. This idea that God is our maker, that creativity exudes out of God. It is his very essence. That the very first thing that God would do is to make. That God himself is creative. It's part of who he is. And that I think that we can get lost in figuring out the how. And we can argue over it, and we can divide over it, and we can categorize, and we could place little camps around these divisions, and completely miss the fact that one of the central characteristics of who God is that he is a maker, a creator, who everything that comes out of him is good. with every brushstroke that God created the heavens and the earth and everything in it. He sat back and he reflected over it and pondered and valued and cherished the idea that it was good. And so from the very beginning, we can see that God is a maker. And more importantly, that God is our maker. That not only did he create the heavens and the earth and everything in it, but God very intentionally saw dust and took it and crafted it and made it into us. And what I think is so interesting is that when you see it all unfold, at first God, and I love that God, being the ultimate creative, he is like a multidisciplined artist, right? At the beginning, he's a spoken word artist, like the best one out there, right? He says it and it happens. It says that he spoke this into existence. He said it and it happened. And God is just this like brilliant, powerful, the best TED Talk YouTube video you've ever seen, better than Corey, better than Gil, better than any spoken word person we've ever heard. God is he's just spitting beauty all over the world. And he's a spoken word artist, but all of a sudden he just changes gears. And then he's no longer a spoken word artist. When it comes to us, God becomes a sculptor. And it says that for us, for some crazy reason, we are the only things that God created out of something that already existed. See, God spoke the dust into existence, then he took the dust and he began to form it like a sculptor. And then he took the very essence of who he is, the very goodness, the very being of himself. It says he's breathed that essence into humanity. But it says that God went about it a different way, because I think that there is something different and unique about humanity. And it's this very idea that God didn't just flippantly make us, but God made us in his image. Which is such an interesting thing to get our heads around. That God made you and me in his image. It says in Genesis 1:26, it says, "Then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. I don't know about you, but when I look in the mirror, I don't see God. And it's an interesting statement, this idea that God made you and me in his own image. Because when I look in the mirror, I just see a ridiculous mustache and this or that I would like to change about myself. And when I look at all of you, to be quite honest, I really don't see God. And I think this is probably one of the most broken parts about humanity, is that we do not see the image of God in each other. And I think for us, sometimes we don't know what comes first, the chicken or the egg. Like that conundrum, do you ever reflect on that? There's no answer. Like, what came first, the chicken or the egg? It drives me nuts. And sometimes I can't really comprehend what comes first. Is it important first for us to believe that God is my maker, or that God is our maker? See, they're both incredibly important for us to get to. And I think sometimes if we get stuck on one, we'll never get to the other, but we can't get to the one if we never get to the other. See, I think it's so important for us, and the reason why we chose this language is that God is our maker. That's where we want to get to. That's the target, for us to understand, to comprehend, and then to build our lives on this idea that God is our maker. Our maker. We, us, not just us in this room, but us all around the world. That God made all of us. But we really can't get there if we first don't believe that God made me, that God made us, that the image of God is in me. And so many of us, we suffer with self-worth issues. The biggest dilemma in our lives is we don't see any value in ourselves. We don't see any value. We believe nothing good could come from this. And you can stare in the mirror all day long, and no matter what's been done to you or what you've done to others, you can stop at the place where you're looking in the mirror and you're going, God, I don't see you in me. And if we can never get to the place where we could see the image of God in us and the incredible value that God has placed on us, the incredible worth and value, that the intentionality that God spent when he created you. I love the scriptures that say, you knit me together in my mother's womb. You knew me before I took my first breath. You marked out the time in history that you would place me here. You knew the numbers of hair on my head. All of those scriptures that point to the significance of the depth of love that God has for each and every one of us. If we can't even get there, we'll certainly never see that in other people. We'll certainly never begin to believe that God is our maker. And so I think step one for many of us is to first see the value that God has in you. And sometimes you just need someone to tell you again and again and again. And that's why the community, the church, is so important. If we ever do anything in love, it would be to point out and identify the image of God in each and every one of us. To point to the value and worth of every human being. And it starts with seeing that in yourself. But it can't stay there for long. Because if you get to that place where you can see how amazing God made you, that's so cool. And you really start to feel really good about that. If it stays there, it is so toxic. In the very cause of all of the division that we see in the world. Even the division over how the world was created or how we view or understand God. It all comes from us lacking in understanding that God is our maker, that he made every single human being with the same matter of intentionality and love and worth and value. And if we can't begin to see that in other people, then I think we will always fail to live out what it means to believe that God is our maker. See, there's implications for us personally to understand that we're made in the image of God, but there's even greater implications for us collectively, communally, when we begin to believe that God has made us as a people. And we have seen so many different attempts at trying to live this out, and it's a difficult thing. You know, right now, at this place in history, we are still troubled and trying as humanity to get to the place where unity and acceptance and love and embrace is the first step for us. For so many of us, it takes hard work and intentionality. We are unaware even of our own biases, of our own prejudgments, of each other. And to be quite honest, we really fall short of seeing the image of God in other people all the time, even in the simplest of ways. I did my triathlon yesterday, which was awesome. You guys are so stoked because I'm going to stop talking about it in my sermons. But it was amazing to me. I'm like doing a triathlon, which is like a big deal for me, right? And I'm proud of myself. In the moment, I'm like, I'm doing this. Even though I hear my son telling me over and over, Miller's never quit. Because I wanted to quit like right away out the gate before we even started. And I'm like, this is nuts. So finally I do the swim, I do the transition, I get on the bike, and I'm dying. I'm like, I am not made for this. And I'm on the bike, and I'm like, I don't even know if I can hold on to the handlebars anymore. And I need a drink. And I'm doing everything I can to just like ride my bike straight. And I'm going up a hill, and I just can't take it anymore. And I pull out my water bottle, and I'm like trying to take a drink. And then meanwhile, I'm like swerving all over the place, right? And this guy comes speeding behind me, and he's like, hold your line. And, oh boy, I may have yelled, God bless you, back to him. I was so mad. And I had literally and instantly had all of these reasons why I hate that guy. Literally. I'm like, don't you know this is my friend? I'm trying to stay straight. My arms don't work. I need a drink of water. I'm new to this. Give me a break. Why don't you slow down? Why don't you yield to the weak? And I was so mad, like really mad, like literally hated that guy, did not see the image of God in him at all. And that was like the stupidest, like bad moment of my day yesterday. Like I was angry towards a guy on a bike in a Speedo. You know what I mean? Like, and it didn't make it any easier that he was like 72 years old and he was beating me up a hill. And I'm like, I absolutely do not see the image of God in you right now. You know, and if it is that difficult in that benign of a situation, what are we up against, people? I mean, we have a lot of ground to take when it comes to not only believing that God is a maker, that God is my maker, but God is our maker. And when we believe that, it has massive implications on the way we view and value and cherish and embrace each other, regardless of our differences. And Jesus goes to the extreme. And he says that we would love our enemies, that we'd pray for those who persecute us, that we'd give the shirt off our own back, that we'd go the extra mile. Like, I would not have given that dude my shirt. It wouldn't have fit him. But, I mean, how challenging can this be? And so for us together, as we start to really wonder and imagine, what is like one tangible thing that we together as a church would change when we actually believe the statement that God is our maker? It really sets us out and it moves us into the space as a church where we see we absolutely believe in the value of every human being. Every human being. And what that means for us is there are no ordinary people. There are no ordinary people. There are no people who are better than others, and there are no people who are worse than others. That every life, every human being is cherished by God, and he longs for us to cherish each other. I have no idea what that means for you specifically, but I could give you about 50,000 implications of what it means for me personally. And I'm desperately trying to grow in this arena of my life. And I think for us as a church, this will never become true of us as a church if it never becomes true of us as a person. And so one really simple thing that we can do together is we could lean in to valuing the outsider, to valuing the person that is not like us. And I'm telling you right now, think about the dude on the bike who just passed you. He pisses you off. That's your Facebook person that said something that you don't like. The person who made a comment on your Facebook thread about your political views or about your value of this or of that. You could name them right now. Go ahead, name them in your head. Those are the people that God wants you to love and to value. It's that simple and it's that challenging. And I think one of the things that I hope that the people of God will be known for in this world, in this place in history, is that we would lead what it looks like to embrace and to bring reconciliation and unity to areas where there has never been any. And so much of that we see happening in our country around race, around different political views, so much division. And I believe the church, that we can and we should be those who lead the conversation what that looks like. And a real simple, practical thing that we can do this week is we can go to a thing called a Race for Unity. And I'm going to put the slide up here. And Pastor Miles McPherson at the Rock Church has just written a new book called The Third Option. And it's all about how do we step into the friction of racial division in our church, in our country, in our city, in our communities. And we have so much work to do on this front. And we are privileged as a city to have a pastor like Miles leading us in this conversation. And for us at Makers Church, we do not believe in reinventing the wheel. We are not going to go try to handle this on our own. We're going to partner together with the Big C Church and figure out how we can step into this. And this is an event that I want every single one of us to be at this Saturday. Now I'm going to give full disclosure. I am not going to be at that event. I know what you're thinking. You're like, what the heck? You're trying to get everybody there. I had a trip planned before I knew about this, and I couldn't change it. But I'll tell you what, my heart is 100% not only at the event, but around this conversation and what it means for us as a church. And so I would love to see Makers Church have a show of force at this event as a small way of saying we're going to enter into this conversation together as the church. And we're going to do our part to figure out how we can begin to value the image of God in every single person, whether they look like us or not, come from where we came from or don't. Value the things we do or don't. And that's my call to action for you guys this morning. You can register on our website and go to the event. We have an amazing team that's going to rally everybody for it. And there will be massive implications that come from this event for our church. And so I'd love for you to be at that. God is our maker, and we're made in his image. Not only am I made in his image, but you're made in his image. And you want to see it in yourself, and you need to see it in others. We have a long way to go. And the last thing I want to close with is this idea, if it's true that God is a maker, and that we are made in his image, then it's absolutely certain that we are made to make. That we're made to make. This is where the name of our church comes from, Makers Church. It's simply that. God is our maker. We are made in his image. We are made to make. Therefore, we're Makers Church. Which means we are makers. We are makers. We are creative. We are generative. We are those who will take the very fabric and the beauty and the uniqueness of our essence that God poured into us, and we will use it to go out and make a difference in the world, to make beautiful things, to make a change. In verse 28, it says that God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds of the sky and every living creature that moves on the ground." Then God said, "I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth and all the birds in the sky and all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food." And it was so. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. See, I love that when God created the earth, and when God created us, he didn't tie a pretty bow around it and said, "Finito, it is complete." No, God put into motion a humanity and an earth and a natural order of things that would reproduce, that would bear fruit, that would make and create. That God, he set us with a mission, and he left us unfinished to complete a work that he began. That is the way that God set this into motion. God creates things that are capable of creating more. We, in a sense, not only did God give us the ability to rule the plants, and for those of you that are vegans, you're like, amen, right? And he gave us rule and dominion over all the wild beasts, and for those of you that love meat, you're like, amen. You're both right. Don't argue over it. In the beauty of how God has wired us to value different things and even have a different take on what we would even eat as people. God has given us dominion over those things. But he has given us the ability to create and to be co-creators with God. And when he starts the church, he asks us to be the participants with him in bringing about his heaven to earth. That we get to go out and make on earth as it is in heaven. That is what we're called to as a church. Creativity is not just this noun or a verb. For us to be generative and to make something, it's not just about something we do. Making is actually, it's a place, it's a space, it's a gathering, it's a sinking together of the creative genius and the divine power of creativity and the human power of imagination. And when those two things come together, we begin to get a taste of heaven, a taste of what God would intend. And as I think about when I first had this idea or this metaphor that really clicked for me, it was watching my wife give birth to our first son, Blake. And this is way too literal of a metaphor, but go with me. I've delivered several babies. I work as a fireman. I've delivered a handful of babies, and I've seen children be born, and it's super cool. But there's nothing like watching your own child be born. Nothing. And for those of you that are parents in the room, you can't explain it. There's just nothing like it. But what came to my surprise, what was shocking to me, is that as I waited around to watch my son take his first deep breath, and this happened for me 3 times. I've seen three of my children be born. It's amazing. It's miraculous every single time. As miraculous as that was, what was more miraculous to me is how with every contraction and every breath that my wife had and took, I grew more and more deeply in love with her. I mean, like unimaginably more in love. To watch her labor connected us so deeply in a way that I had no idea was possible. And it was like almost in that moment, the metaphor of us being the bride and Jesus being the bridegroom, it clicked for me. That we as the church are the bride. And I sat there and I watched my bride labor and give birth to something new, to a child, to a new creation. And I couldn't help but believe that that is exactly how Jesus looks at us when we create, when we labor, when we make, when we go out and we are generative, that God looks at us with so much joy and love. Making and creating and imagining isn't just something that like God wants us to do. He designed us to do it. And God has designed and equipped each and every one of us uniquely to go out and make in a different way. For some of you, you are actually creative, and when it comes to like artistry and visual artists, and you can graphic design and you can make beautiful things on paper. And I think it's so easy to look at those things and go, yeah, that they're creative. I'm not. I'm a dumb fireman. It's so easy for me to think I'm not creative. I don't have a creative bone in my body. But then I began to realize that like being married is a creative act. That being a father is a creative act. That being a fireman is a creative act. And each and every one of us has been given a vocation and a gifting to step into fully and to go out and live in a way that you believe that you are made to make. What has God called you to? What creativity and imagination has God given you to go out and make a difference in whatever your sphere of influence is? What is that thing, and will you heed the call to go and make? I love this quote by John Muir. It says, when we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe. When we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe. I love this quote because it reminds me of the fact that we actually are not God. Isn't that a huge burden? See, God is a maker. We're made in his image. We are made to make. But we don't get to speak it and see it happen. We can only make from what has already been made. We are the ones who can take something that's broken and we can renovate it. We can redeem it. We could do all sorts of things with what has already been made. See, we don't get to speak anything into it. That'd be an amazing superpower. But we could take this and we could take that. We could take this broken thing and that broken environment. We could take this broken person and our broken selves. And we can start with our lives making it into something that is beautiful with the power of God at the center. To reform, to repurpose, to recreate. That's what God has called us to. That you can't select anything out and not see that God has orchestrated it all and connected it all together, and he's calling us as a people to be participants in that. And I want to end with this in Colossians 1:15. It says, the Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He's the beginning and the firstborn among the dead, so that in everything he might have supremacy. For God was pleased to have all the fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. It speaks of Jesus, the Son of God, who all of us were made by and through and for. And I absolutely believe that the only way that we can actually begin to live this reality and truth that God is our maker, that we're made in his image, that we are made to make, is to be made at peace with Jesus, to be reconciled to him. And I think so many times we miss the mark because we try to do it on our own power. And we never can and we never will. But when we have the power of the living God, Jesus Christ in us, we can make beautiful things. And so if you're here this morning and you've never entered into a relationship with Jesus Christ, we would love to walk with you through that. One of the very best ways is in a moment after I pray, our prayer team is going to come up. And if you'd like prayer for anything, we'd love to pray for you. But if you'd like to enter into a relationship with Jesus, we would love to walk you through that this morning. So let's pray. God, we thank you, Lord, that you are the maker of all things. God, that you have made us, that you've invited us, God, to co-work with you, to participate with you in bringing about heaven on earth. God, what a privilege that is for us. And so, God, my prayer is that for us as a people, we would begin to see your image in ourselves. And God, in doing that, that you would allow us to see your image in each other. And God, that you would move us out together as a church to bring about peace and reconciliation and unity, God, in areas where there has been none. God, that we would take new ground, that we would endeavor, God, to do the impossible. But Jesus, we know that it's only possible with you at the center of our lives. And so, Jesus, we say, lead us, show us, guide us, and compel us, God, to go and to make. In your name we pray. Amen.
You are listening to the Makers Church podcast. For more information about our community, please visit makerschurch.org.